Hello and welcome to Ari Faye's Theater of Pain, Resto Druid tips, tricks, and kicks commentary video where I'll go through all the things you need to know as a Resto Druid running Theater of Pain. So a lot of people do like to avoid pulling this pack of contenders and the ritualist, so they'll cage off or trap the contender and only pull the bloodhorn into the boss. The bloodhorn is going to cast Raging Tantrum, which enrages the mob and causes heavy damage for 4 seconds. If you're the only druid in the key, this guy is probably the reason the key holder decided to bring you to this dungeon, because after the mob has completed its cast of Raging Tantrum, you should soothe them. The other mobs over there that we skipped, I will go ahead and talk about at the very end. We have Pecaran the Virulent, Sathel the Accursed, and Decia the Decapitator. Instead of calling them by their actual names, I will call them by some nicknames I have given them based on the player profile. PT Virulent is going to cast a frontal. You should bait the frontal cone with your positioning, and at full energy they also cast Noxious Spores, which spawns puddles under your feet 3 times over and leaves a nasty spot that you should avoid standing in. ST Accursed casts Necrotic Bolt at a random player. You'll want to keep this interrupted using your Skull Bash. He also puts out a magic debuff called Withering Touch, which needs to be dispelled on cooldown. So dispel the first target, and then the target that you have not dispelled, go ahead and make sure that they stay healed up with Rejuve, Life Bloom, and Germ, possibly Regrowth, and then dispel them as soon as your dispel is off cooldown. He also casts Searing Death, which requires you to spread away from your party members. As we like to call him, Despacito will do a Mighty Smash, and you'll definitely want to use Bear Form or Science Vigor on high keys for that AoE that goes out. Otherwise, you could just heal everybody up after they have taken the big damage. Interestingly, when each of the bosses die, the living one does gain 10% more damage. So there is a bit of an order to which these bosses should be killed, sometimes even based on the tank. Generally, people try to target Despacito first because of that big AoE, and then they will try and kill either the Accursed or the Brilliant, depending on the tank. For healing on this fight, you're going to focus on maintaining a Rejuve on everybody, adding a German if people need a little bit extra healing, Life Blooming if people need a little bit extra healing, and then when the big AoE goes out, do a Swift Mend into a Wild Growth, or you can Convoke. You can also use your Convoke to DPS if you can manage to spot heal everybody up with some additional regrowths. I'm going to go through the trash and bosses in the order in which we did it for this dungeon, although tanks really mix it up depending on their personal preferences. There is some RNG to this side of the map. It will randomly spawn either Dokig the Brutalizer or Nekthara the Mangler. People tend to prefer the Brutalizer to be the one that is summoned, since it does not do quite as big damage as our Mangler here. The Brutalizer just kind of does a big tank buster that you have to be aware of and make sure the tank is healed up. The Mangler, on the other hand, summons Whirling Blades. You should stack on the Mangler so that the Whirling Blades are summoned on top of each other so there is more room on the arena, and you should avoid those blades after they are summoned. He also does a Interrupting Roar, which prevents you from casting, and you'll want to avoid his AoE Whirlwind. Some tanks will try to skip this mini-boss, which is Heaven the Breaker. You should stop casting when Interrupting Roar goes off, otherwise you'll want to keep your feet out of the ground smash, and there is a bit of a tank buster, so watch the tank. This is a pretty easy mob to heal, just top everybody up, otherwise you can DPS. I do try to do a little bear form on this high of a key level when Interrupting Roar goes out, so I don't take quite as much damage. This next group has a captain, some conscripts, and 2 arbalists. The captain has a commanding presence, which buffs the other mobs and reduces the strength of AoE damage, so it's really important for DPS to target the captain as a prio. The arbalists target random players with a bleed effect, and also do random damage with their shoot abilities. And the conscripts are just some fodder. They don't really do much at all. For this pack, you're going to want to heal the targets of the bleed with your Life Bloom, Rejuve, Germ, and spam regrowths. You can also use your Iron Bark on somebody who needs a little bit extra health. The tank doesn't really need it on this pack. If the tank puts a marker here, he's expecting you to use your Stampeding Roar there or some personal speed boost in order to avoid that mini-boss. But that mini-boss's name is Advent Nevermore. He throws a ricocheting blade at a random player, which will hit them for a good amount of damage. There's also a Seismic Stomp, which does a pulse of AoE damage where everyone will need to be healed up afterwards, and then otherwise just do some DPS. Xav the Unfallen spawns an oppressive banner, which causes all players to be slowed. If the banner is still up after he has jumped, you can do a Stampeding Roar to help give everybody a speed buff to move out of some of Xav's AoE abilities. There's the big circle, which you should avoid casting after it has completed, otherwise you will be interrupted. And when the boss jumps into the center of the platform, I recommend turning into a bear, especially on higher difficulties because the damage is so high. You can use your cat form also to quickly get out of some of these AoE abilities that the boss is casting. Otherwise, there is a lot of space on this fight to DPS. It is kind of your responsibility to help DPS the banner. I would recommend saving your Convoke for a banner when the DPS are down fighting each other, because it basically what you'll find is that every other banner all the DPS are up for, and then when the DPS are down on the platform, there's only one DPS up here, which means that your Convoke is a great time to use that big burst damage. The next hallway we are going towards starts with a variety of disgusting new mobs, including the Diseased Horde, which casts a meat shield, which you can CC or interrupt, but it's not necessary. The disgusting refuses jump out at random targets and then thrash at them, damaging anyone near their target. They also leave a burst circle when they die, which you should avoid standing in. Right off the bat, for this large pull, you're going to want to put your vortex down wherever the tank has settled. So give the tank a second to pull everything, and then put your vortex down where he's standing. That way, when the sludge spewers, which do a leaping thrash at people, they'll be pulled back in. To heal this pull, I would recommend keeping your abundance stacks high, as many rejuves and germinations as you can maintain, and then having your life blooms out. If people start taking damage, use a swift mend into wild growth, and then save nature's swiftness for somebody who gets targeted with extra damage. Otherwise, spam regrowth on any targets who need it. You should keep the sludge spewers interrupted or CC'd, so it's also advisable that you use your Skull Bash on cooldown and use in-cap roar if you need to, or typhoon, in order to prevent the sludge spewer's casts from going off. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of the more difficult trash pulls of the dungeon. If you can make it through this pull without any deaths, the likelihood of you timing the key is very high. This is another spot where you can just put your vortex down. Since we do have some more sludge spewers here, try to keep them interrupted. They are casting Withering Discharge, which really needs to be interrupted. They also cast Decaying Filth, which should be interrupted, but it's not as immediate of a priority. Now we run into the gas bag, the ones we avoided in that other hallway. This is a pretty difficult mob to heal with because we have the Decaying Filth going out, we have things that aren't getting interrupted a lot of times, and then there's there's green stuff on the floor that also causes damage. The gas bag pulses AoE damage and does what me and my friends like to call a frontal and a bactal. You can avoid it by standing next to the gas bag, in between the bactal and the frontal. It also causes rancid bile puddles to spawn under two players randomly, so be careful about your positioning. If avoiding the bactal and frontal means that you have to stand in one of those green puddles, then just bear form into it, because it's better to live that than to take one of those frontal or bactals. Gorechop is going to send a tenderizing smash and grip in all players, which does a lethal AoE if you don't run out of it. And then there's a really fun meat hook wall that comes down and that could spawn on either side of the arena. You need to be careful of your positioning because there is a hole in the moving wall that you need to find and slide through in order to not get hooked. The wall brings down 2 adds called oozing leftovers. If you get caught by the wall, the hooks will apply a jagged gash and drag you across the room. It damages like a bleed because it'll cause damage to the victim every 2 seconds. But if you set yourself up where that cast is going to spawn, sort of in that circle, then you won't be pulled in. I actually recommend that you sometimes let yourself get gripped and stay far away because you can dodge some of those leaping thrash abilities that you saw that the leftovers use. RNG can cause you to get targeted twice in a row, and getting hit twice by those things really takes your health down to low. It could basically kill you. If you are far away and healing, you'll be able to stay mobile, and you can even dodge their jumps by continuing to move around the arena. You can also put your vortex down to help with the jumpers. It'll pull them back. I'd recommend doing that when they have higher health. You can also use your Typhoon to knock them back and reduce their movement speed by 50%. There's also a tank buster on the boss, so just keep an eye out for if the tank's health gets low. For healing this boss, I try to maintain a rejuve on everyone and then maximize usage of Swiftmend into regrowth and Nature's Swiftness into regrowth. If that's not enough to keep someone topped off, then Life Bloom them and then spam some regrowths. If someone gets pinned to the wall, I just spam regrowths on them or they won't live it. You could try to throw a Bark Skin to yourself if you need to hunker down and cast a bunch of regrowths or a wild growth to keep people topped up. Or you can use Bark Skin if you get jumped on in case you get unlucky and targeted again. Like I said, keep an eye out on the tank's health because if the tank's health goes low, you can just throw an Iron Bark on him and it'll heal him right up. Now this last hallway that we have, we will immediately run into some shackled souls. You'll want to avoid the circles that are spawning on the floor. I like to prowl through this area so I don't get targeted by the shackled soul's bind soul, which causes damage to their target and slows them. You can interrupt the bind soul with a Skull Bash or an In-Cap Roar or Typhoon. This pull usually includes the Guardian. The Portal Guardian will send out a periodic debuff that you'll need to dispel, but you'll also want to make sure that once the tank is settled that you put your Efflorescence down, Life Bloom, 2 targets, and send out mass rejuves and germs in preparation for the Guardian's big AoE called Soulstorm. You should use a defensive when it goes out so you can focus on healing, and maximize use of the Abundance talent by keeping your Abundance stacks high and then casting Regrowth repeatedly for some big heals. You can also send a Swiftmend into a Wild Growth and heal Convoke as an alternative. This platform brings on a new mob called the Maniacal Soulbinder, which casts Necrotic Bolt Volley and Necrotic Bolt. Necrotic Bolt Volley needs to be interrupted. Necrotic Bolt can go off, but it's nice if it is interrupted. A lot of times the tank will pull this whole platform. We've added a new mob, the Bone Maguses. The Bone Maguses cast Bone Spear, which needs to stay interrupted. So on this platform we have 2 casts that have to be interrupted. Necrotic Bolt Volley and Bone Magus. It's important for you to be aware of the Guardian casting Soulstorm, because that AoE really does kind of sneak up on you. The tank might take you to the right path, where you'll find a Bone Reaver. You'll want to avoid the circles created by the bone spikes and stay away from the mob during its whirlwind attack phase. This platform adds another new mob, Nefarious Darkspeaker. It shoots a wind in a line toward a random player. Avoid this or you will get yeeted back to Maldraxxus. There is a little dispel that goes out here. The dispel is causing players to spawn little exploding purple puddles underneath them. They will continue to spawn those until they are dispelled. Okay, now we have Kul'tharok. You're going to stay loosely spread on this fight because 2 random people will be targeted for Well of Darkness, which you should focus on healing. Puts a heavy amount of damage on 2 targets. You can do so with Rejuve, Germ, Life Bloom, and some regrowths there. The boss also spawns orbs, which you should dodge, but won't kill you on lower key levels. If you or another party member does get hit, make sure that you heal them up because they will take some big damage from it. At some point you will get an arrow over your head and you should stack with the other players. so you can spawn your lost souls in the same location. That way the DPS can DPS them down. You can also help DPS a lot in this fight since there is not a lot of mass AoEs going out. Try to keep the necrotic bolt interrupted to reduce damage going out, and stay away from behind the tank because the boss casts a tank buster in a line that carries on behind them. The final boss is Mordretha. They are one of the more complicated bosses of this season's dungeons. Sometimes the tank will grab the contenders and the ritualist here and pull them into the boss. The contenders can be soothed to remove Death Wish, and they do a little charge at the tank. I don't really focus on soothing the contenders, but they do some heavy damage to the tank if you don't. And the ritualist will cast Unholy Fervor, which needs to stay interrupted, and they also cast Necrotic Bolt, which can be interrupted. If the tank is pulling those mobs into the final boss, I would keep the Ritualist interrupted as frequently as possible so it can stay moving. The first phase of Mordretha will let you do a good amount of DPS, but be sure to dodge her frontal Dark Devastation, which chooses a random target and then rotates slightly during the channel. The boss will summon a rift and then pull players towards it, and then Manifest Death will cause circles to spawn under every player, and then a Deathwalker to spawn. Make sure you're spread for those circles, and then immediately Skull Bash your ad as soon as it spawns. There will be some AoE to heal after the circles expire, and position yourself so you can cast a Swiftmend into Wild Growth and interrupt your ad. You can also blow the ads in towards the tank with a Typhoon. After the boss is pushed to 50% health, they will channel a spell called Echoes of Carnage that will end in a big pulse of AoE, and then a bunch of smaller pulses of AoE. The big pulse you should turn into a bear form, as it is a pretty decent amount of damage. And then you'll also want to watch out for the charging rams and the big circles. Try to position yourself near the boss for the second phase, because you'll need to quickly dodge her frontal while healing a decent amount of damage. Use your Convoke wisely. Try to keep everybody hotted up with your rejuves and terminations and life blooms, and then regrowth when necessary. Try to wild growth while any AoEs are going out. Thank you so much for watching Arifae's tips, tricks, and kicks for Resto Druid and Theater of Pain. I hope you learned a little something about how you can use your toolkit.